Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. So, how about a simple, up-to-date guide to successful summer lettuce production? Let's do it. First, we're in central Kentucky and we average about 1,000 degrees and 1,000% humidity from May until what seems like the end of time. We're also considered semi-subtropical, which I'm still not convinced is an actual thing. With that context out of the way, step one for summer lettuce production: order the right seed. When you're ordering seed for summer lettuce production, you cannot use just any old lettuce seed. Lettuce doesn't love to grow in the heat. You need lettuce seed that was bred to be heat tolerant. I have not tried every good heat tolerant lettuce variety out there, but the varieties that are worth starting with for novices to the summer lettuce game are Blue Rock for a romaine, Muir for a sandwich leaf lettuce type, any of the Salanova varieties, which yes are weirdly expensive, but also have some of the best flavor and heat tolerance around. I am trialing Roan and Albacchieri this year, and so far so good, but I'll keep you updated on those. But again, I have not tried all the lettuce types, and like with any of our videos, please feel free and feel encouraged to add your favorite varieties to the comment section. In our case, we mostly grow lettuce for cut mixes, and we sell some romaine, but also there are not a ton of head varieties that I recommend for summer, only because one, leaf lettuces tend to do better in the heat, and two, head lettuces can often bolt just being the term for them going to seed. And the third reason I love leaf lettuce is that you can pick out a damaged leaf if you're selling a leaf lettuce mix. If you get some damage in a head, on the other hand, the entire head is done for. Like, nobody wants a head even if like only part of it is damaged. As someone who operates a business, we call that a total loss, or just simply an expletive for efficiency's sake. For directly sowing into the soil, I am fine with pelleted or raw seed, but raw seed tends to be cheaper, and I sow it with the earthway seeder with the lettuce plate, but more on direct sowing in a minute. For sowing into trays or blocks, I vastly prefer to buy pelleted seed because at some point in its evolution, lettuce decided it wanted its seeds to be obnoxiously tiny because it didn't want to be confused with its far more farmer-friendly cousin, the sunflower. Thanks, lettuce. Step two, store the seed right. Almost every seed has a simple preference in terms of storage, and you just have to remember this mantra: cool but dry. It's not much of a mantra. You just have to remember it. If you only get to choose one of cool or dry, pick dry. Nothing will tank your germination rates and seed longevity like fluctuations in moisture. We keep our seed in the cooler and containers so no moisture can attack them, because it will do that, and it's not pretty. Step three, germination considerations. Lettuce is a finicky germinator. Lettuce seed does not prefer to germinate past 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 23.9 degrees Celsius. Sure, some of it will germinate in the heat, because genetic variations are how every carbon-based species reliably ensures success in the future, because you never know how the climate or environment around an organism is going to change. It's the whole point of diversity. But the majority of lettuce still prefers temperatures between 55 and 75 degrees or 12.8 and 23.9 degrees Celsius to germinate. So how do you achieve that temperature when it's in the 90s for multiple weeks in a row in your climate and barely dips below 75 degrees at night? Well, let me run you through our process. If the night is not dipping below 75 degrees Fahrenheit, then our process works like this. Though you can use cell trays, the density of the soil blocks keeps them slightly cooler for longer, so I do prefer soil blocks to cell trays. So using our Swift Blocker soil block maker, which I'll link in the show notes, we make a 200 block tray of soil blocks. I then pay my kids in Lego sets to seed them with one pelleted seed per soil block. We lightly cover them with a small addition of soil mix. I cannot stress enough how light this covering has to be. I've seen people demolish their germination by covering the seeds way too much, because lettuce seed does not like to be planted deep. You almost don't need any covering at all. But it will help to insulate the seed from the heat and hold in the moisture, so I recommend a light dusting of soil mix or vermiculite, the popcorn of minerals, as a covering. Then I put the blocks in the cooler overnight and remove them the following afternoon to a cool, shady spot to germinate. If the temps are going below that 75 degrees Fahrenheit mark overnight, I skip the cooler and we will just leave them in our open shed in the shade for the next 2 days, watching carefully for germination, because if they germinate and grow in the shade, they will become leggy with a really long stem. You want squat transplants in general for most crops. It's no different for lettuce. With either the cooler or no cooler methods, they should germinate within about 2 days. We often do trays on Friday afternoon, and then they are ready to move into the greenhouse on Monday morning. Once you see the germs popping up at all, it is time to move them into the greenhouse, which in our case does not have the sides on, so it's really just a covered sunny area. If it's still brutally hot, we will place another tray on top of that tray for the next day just to help them acclimate and finish their germination and protect the young sprouts. We will remove the tray when the sun starts to go down that first evening. We don't want it on there for too long because it will also make them leggy. Now it's just a matter of keeping the trays alive and well watered until they are roughly this size. Bottom watering is the best way to reduce disease, but sometimes a little misting will help keep them cool. So watering is kind of up to you so long as it is even and consistent throughout. If you're doing lettuce in something like paper pots, you will need to plant them earlier, like when they're putting on their first true leaves. For cells and soil blocks in the summer, you will likely want to plant them at a smaller size than other times of the year as well. This is because I find that a smaller transplant has an easier time adapting to the heat than a larger transplant, so long as the moisture is there at the plant roots. That said, if you go a little long in the greenhouse, not all is lost, especially with soil blocks that don't suffer from becoming root bound like cell trays can. I would just definitely recommend shade cloth for the first week, whereas you may be able to get away with just misting the plants if they are shorter. More on misting in a minute. Step 4, harden them off. Set a table outside of your greenhouse in direct sunlight. This will help toughen the plants up for the harsh real world. Water them just as much as you did in the greenhouse, and if you used bottom watering in the greenhouse, I might again suggest using some overhead watering just to cool the leaves of the plant down when they're in the direct sunlight. A week is ideal, but even a day is better than no hardening off at all. That said, if you got a plant, you got a plant. So if you don't have time to harden them off, just expect to have to water them in like crazy in the garden and probably use some shade cloth, which I recommend anyway, but definitely when they have not been hardened off at all. Step 5, planting. The spacing on our head lettuces and leaf lettuce transplants is roughly the same at 8 by 8 inch grid. We use this thing called the gritter, which is built for 30-inch beds, but since 30-inch beds are not a super efficient use of space in our context, or probably any context really for that matter, because it means just managing a lot more pathways, as I've discussed in other videos, and in the Living Soil Handbook, which when you pick it up from no-tillgrowers.com helps to support our work. Anyway, we use 48-inch beds or 4-foot beds. I see you. So we just run the gritter down the middle of the bed, creating that roughly 8 by 8 inch grid, and then we just eye the 2 outer rows. You could also just draw a string like Jackson described in this video, because the gritter ain't cheap. That said, I love the gritter. It has been quite helpful for me because it's fast and it makes even rows. Either way, it is totally fine though. Lettuce doesn't care if it's in a straight line, just that the lines are relatively evenly spaced so the plants don't crowd each other. Do the physical planting in the morning when it's cool, or in the evening. If it's hot and the soil is hot, the plants are going to suffer. If you move too slow or something emergent comes up and you have to stop planting, you could lose the plants that you've put in if they're not ready to be protected. I recommend planting with both hands if you can, at least for part of the time. This will help speed things up tremendously. To be sure, in the summer, if you're in even a slightly hot region, you will very likely lose some lettuce, especially as you first start trying this summer lettuce thing. In the summer, I tend to start around 1.5 times or more the amount of lettuce that I need, not because I expect to lose a bunch, but I start extra because one, that gives me extra in case I do lose some lettuce, which happens because, as we've discussed, lettuce hates the summer, and as we have not discussed, I am human. And two, other growers are just as likely to lose some of their own summer lettuce, and so chefs will come calling in July and August almost without fail. Happens every year, so it doesn't hurt to have some extra lettuce on hand. And this June, I lost more than I normally do because it got hotter for longer than usual and I wasn't prepared because I was being lazy. I do that. It was a good reminder of what I tell people all the time in terms of summer lettuce. Lettuce will grow for you in the summer, absolutely, but you have to be vigilant about every single little step. Now, can you sow lettuce directly into the soil in the summer? Totally, kinda. First, you're gonna need some really weed-free soil to do that. Also, I find the all-star lettuce mix from Johnny's germinates pretty well, but some of the others may work fine too. In drier climates, you can get away with denser plantings than in more humid climates. If sowing into compost, I like the earthway seeder with the lettuce plate and cram as many rows in there as I can. With loose soil and nice tilth, I like the 4-row pinpoint seeder, though it does not work well in compost mulch. No matter how you plant it, after you sow it, you have to water the fire out of it and place a tarp with the white side up to protect it from the sun and hold in that moisture. If you don't have a tarp, get it as shaded as you possibly can and keep it as wet as you possibly can. The idea is high moisture equates to cooler soil. Remove the tarp or covering the second that you see sprouting at all, but keep it shaded and watered for a couple weeks after, just to make sure it acclimates well. Preferably, again, you would do this direct sowing when the nights are not going to stay above 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll be honest that I don't do a ton of direct sowing of lettuce. I just don't like the quality as much as I like the quality from the mixes that are fully grown, almost heads. And the yields are lower weight-wise by about 20 to 30% if you just directly sow it, in my experience. But it can be profitable because it is so fast to production. Like, you're talking about 20 days faster. And also it's less labor, especially if you're using something like the Quick Cut Greens Harvester from Farmer's Friend. I will link all the stuff in the show notes. Probably. I have no idea what step we're on. We'll call it 6. Step 6, keeping it alive. After planting, I add 30% shade cloth and water the plants in really well. Some growers use 50%, and I think that's fine, but maybe a little bit overkill. You can't keep 50% on for very long either, or you'll have weak blanched lettuce that just does not weigh very much. Especially if going into dry compost, they will need a lot of water every day until the roots hit the moist soil below. Remember, compost is dark and therefore it absorbs sunlight and would become dramatically hot for the little lettuce plants. What I've done for years is use this timer here with these little wingtip sprinklers here, both of which I got from DripWorks, which, Patreon members, there is a discount code over there for you for DripWorks and among other farm suppliers at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Just throwing that out there. Those wing sprinklers, did I say wingtip sprinklers? Isn't that a shoe? Anyway, those wing sprinklers work, but so would basically any overhead sprinkler. That's just the one I use because the brown ones cover 4 beds like our shade cloth, and that's what they sold me a long time ago. I used to have that timer set to kick on for 3 minutes every hour from 10 to 6 every hot day, and that way I could get away with not using any shade cloth. Now, doing that method, I didn't lose a lot of lettuce from all that moisture, but I did lose some. So I'm now trying to balance that method with a little bit of shade cloth, again, 30%, though I kind of suspect you could get away with as low as 20 or 15%, but I've never tried that. I don't even know if those are available. Anyway, I add the shade cloth, and then I've moved to 2 5 to 10 minute sprinkling sessions per blazing hot day instead of 8 or whatever it was when I wasn't using the shade cloth and I was just using the timer. Because everyone's context is different, it's not an exact science. Just use enough water to cool the soil and the plants down. So far, I like this shade sprinkler combo method more in terms of the lettuce quality, and it may be better in drier climates where you don't have as much access to water. But I like it less in terms of the living pathways, which are much harder to manage because I have to move the shade cloth around. You see pretty quickly as a market gardener why everyone just moves to growing in tunnels, because ideally I would just have a big shade structure instead of pieces of shade cloth. Also, I'm not putting hoops down this year for the shade cloth because, well, I'd rather spend my time doing literally anything else than putting hoops down for shade cloth and then picking them up after the crop comes out. Instead, I'm just laying the cloth right over top of the lettuce. And I haven't seen any burn on the tips or anything like that, so that's been nice.
A little postscript here. I don't recommend living pathways to everyone, but if you can manage to keep them in check, they are cooler temperature-wise than bare soil. So for summer lettuce growers, they do make at least a little sense.
A suspended shade cloth, though, just to be clear, would be more effective in terms of cooling. But with the little added mist, I seem to get away with just laying the cloth right over top. Laziness, success. And to be sure, my land is just too weird and crooked and sloped to add a good shade structure like this one from our friends at Rimmel. But in an ideal world, yeah, a shade house would be ideal. Trees too. Trains. Trains are great. Trees are nature's shade house and oxygen generators and animal habitats and nutrient retainers. Man, trees are rad. I will often do some interplanting as well to help with shade, which you can learn more about in this video. Step 7, maybe? Pest management. Luckily in the summer, aphids are not as likely to be a problem on our lettuce. In fact, we have very few summer lettuce pests beyond the occasional fungal rot. Our biggest lettuce pests are actually more like lettuce visitors, such as our tiny slugs, cucumber beetles for some reason, spiders, earthworms, snails. None of these seem to damage the lettuce so much as just like hang out in it. This wouldn't be a problem, of course, if we didn't also have to sell the lettuce to people for consumption. Ecological farming is super cool until you sell someone a ladybug with their lettuce mix. There's not so much you can do to prevent most of these bugs or beneficial bugs, nor should you necessarily. If they're not present, you're just doing it wrong. But I don't want to be flippant about it because I know that in some areas, things like slugs and snails can demolish the lettuce. And I know some growers will use Sluggo or other products like that. You can also use beer traps on a small scale. A beer trap is just a cup of beer set near a hot spot overnight. They crawl in and drown, which I think many of us can relate to. I would recommend setting the cup inside of a closed live trap to avoid finding drunken raccoons or possums or skunks raging in your gardens. Our snails are small and pretty benign, so I don't use any products on them, but we do manage them in the wash pack station, which I guess that brings us to step 8, harvest and washing. So we harvest our lettuces early in the morning before the heat has really come on. If it gets later in the day and it's starting to really warm up, we do have to stop and mist the lettuce before harvesting for a few minutes to liven it up and cool it off. Usually we can harvest 100 pounds or so before it really heats up in the morning, depending on how early I feel like getting out there. And then we will put a lid on the bin and pop it in the cooler, set just below 40 degrees Fahrenheit or jacket weather in Celsius, and then we just let it cool while we get ready to wash and pack it. As for the snails and other bugs, we do a 2 or 3 bay rinse. The snail slugs will fall off in the sink, luckily, and then plunging them again into a second rinse, and sometimes the third, takes care of them altogether. A bubbler can come in handy here too. Really hard for us to fit a bubbler in there, so we just kind of do that with our hands. But having the stainless steel, it's nice and easy to clean. We may upgrade to at least one more larger tank in the future, but it works for us for now. And then we spin the lettuce dry and pack it, which you can learn about in this video. And I have work to get to. So I guess that's about it, I think, on summer lettuce for now. Make sure to let us know what I missed or what I got wrong or what varieties you use or what you do differently, where you're located, all those contextual important things. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or other merch at no-tillgrowers.com. Become a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers to help support our work. Again, there's some discount codes over there. Or just hit that super thanks button. That works too. Otherwise, super thanks for watching. We'll see you later. Bye. Kitty. Peek, peek. Too busy now? Too busy to hang out?